Warning, this video is not for kids. If you let your kids watch this and they get all corrupted and into sex and drugs and rock and roll and sinful video games, that's on you. Warning number 2, this video series analyzes a Christian media franchise from just the most dirty lefty perspective you could imagine. Just think Karl Marx fucking his boyfriend Engels on top of a communist flag stuffed in the trunk of a Nissan Leaf while all the Bolsheviks watch. And guess what? They're unionized. They're all unionized! Hello, and welcome to our third installment of Does VeggieTales Hold Up? I am your host, Aaron Lockman, and yes, my arm's in a sling, and no, it ain't no thing. I have a fractured humerus, but don't worry, my sense of humor is just fine. I was riding along on my electric scooter one day, and I hit a pothole, and if I hadn't been wearing a helmet, I'd be fucking dead. Look at that massive crack. That's what I'm gonna do to you if you don't wear one of these. I know it messes up your hair, but you know what else messes up your hair? Cracking your can open and splattering your brains all over the fucking sidewalk. Just get a buzz cut. That's what Buzz Lightyear would want for you. Those movies were right. We're all just breakable, disposable pieces of plastic ultimately destined for the landfill, but we might as well find meaning and love and connection along the way. As I went flying, I did not see my life flash before my eyes. Instead, I just saw highlights from The Flash on the CW, a show I've never watched and never will. What the hell was that about? Anyway, I can't do my job as a delivery driver for the next month or so, if you want to help me not die, Patreon.com/Aaron Lockman. Who knows? Maybe it'll delay your death too. There's only one way to find out. This is the video essay series where we watch every single installment of VeggieTales and just try to kind of figure out what the deal is, man. We have finally made it to the 21st century and things are starting to get serious. Big Idea Studios is going through some truly tumultuous changes, and Jonah, a VeggieTales movie, is looming ever closer. In fact, today we're going to be covering some episodes from both shortly before and after the release of Jonah, simply because I kind of think the movie deserves its own standalone installment, which will be coming up next. But in the meantime, we've got a batch of stories that covers an impressively wide variety of tones and experimental formats. In my opinion, we're kind of entering the golden age of VeggieTales, where the artistic ambitions of our creative team soar to some of their highest heights, plummet to some of their lowest lows, and plateau at some of their mediumest mediums. So without further ado, why not venture boldly forward? I'm certain it won't do us any harm.
Ducks, sex with ducks, we'll do it in the rain. Ducks, yeah, ducks, got those web feet on my brain.
Oh, Jesus Christ, I don't even really know where to start with this one. King George and the Ducky is just kind of batshit. You remember last time when I said this? Very little of the Battle of Jericho is fit for child audiences. Yeah, so turns out very little of the Bible is fit for child audiences. There's some fucked up shit in here. There's sex, there's violence, there's more violence. It's really mostly violence. King George and the Ducky is adapted from the story of David and Bathsheba, as depicted in 2 Samuel 11 and 12, but it's unique among the VeggieTales lineup in that the story's creators didn't super want you to know that.
We did something that we've never done before or since, and that is retell a Bible story that we can't let on that we're retelling. Because it's the story of David and Bathsheba, which, as you know, is not exactly a G-rated story.
What are we doing here? Maybe we just shouldn't be telling Bible stories to children? I realize that your entire careers and livelihoods are based around telling Bible stories to children, but maybe that's, bad. You're just making a lot of extra work for yourselves, you know? There's only so many Nabokov novels you can adapt into Sesame Street skits before you just really start to get one hell of a headache. Perhaps it would be helpful at this juncture to summarize the original Bible story, just to give you an idea of the scope of the problem here. Okay, so you remember David, that cute little kid who bashed Goliath's head in with a rock? Well, fast forward a few years, and David is the king of Israel! And he's doing great, flying high why. He's got a huge palace, all the money he could ever want, and he's got a gazillion wives. Now, Israel is at war with a neighboring kingdom called Ammon, but honestly, the war is going really well. The Israelite army is kicking Ammonite ass. So one day, King David is chilling on the roof of his palace, and he sees a woman bathing on a neighboring rooftop, and he's like, fuck, she's hot. So he sends a messenger to ask around, and the messenger's like, yeah, her name is Bathsheba, and she's married to a soldier named Uriah the Hittite. So King David has Bathsheba brought to the palace, and they fuck. Bathsheba goes back home, but a few weeks later, she sends David a letter being like, hey, so, I'm pregnant? And David absolutely panics. He's the king! He can't be having illegitimate kids out here, and Uriah is away at war, so everyone's gonna know it's him! Fuck! So he has Uriah taken off the front lines and brought to the palace, and David's like, hey, buddy, how's the war effort going? And Uriah's like, it's going pretty good. I'm actually a really loyal soldier, and I'd like to get back to the front lines if that's cool. And David's like, actually, no. You've been working so hard. You should go home, go to your house, have your wife bathe your feet, and, you know, if the mood strikes you and you happen to fuck your wife before she starts showing, and Uriah's like, showing what? And David's like, nothing, go fuck your wife. But Uriah doesn't go fuck his wife. Instead of going home, he sleeps on the steps of the palace. And in the morning when he wakes up, David is like, what the fuck, man? And Uriah's like, okay, but what you don't understand about me is that I'm a really loyal soldier. My men are out there on the front lines, just kicking absolute ass, just slaughtering Ammonites left and right, and sleeping together in a big pile on the cold, hard, muscular ground. And you want me to go home and fuck my wife? That's disgusting. And David's like, you know what? You're such a cool dude. Let's hang out and get drunk. Just absolutely fucking turned. And once you've gotten blasted, you'll be so loosey-goosey, and more importantly, horny-gorny, that you will have zero compunctions about going home and fucking your wife. So they do that, and they have a great time, but Uriah still doesn't go home and fuck his wife. He camps out on the palace steps again. And so David is just like, fuck it. He talks to his general, and he's like, yeah, you can send Uriah back to the front lines, but just make sure to put him on the front lines. You know, the most dangerous area of the battle, right? Just try your absolute damnedest to get him killed. And so they do, and it works. Uriah gets got, and David takes Bathsheba as his wife, and she's kinda sad about it, but her emotions are not prioritized in the story because it's the Bible and she's a woman. Anyway, she gives birth to a son who doesn't get a name because he's not important. But then, God gets wind of this, and he super does not like it. So he sends a prophet named Nathan to give King David a good talking to about what just happened. And so Nathan spins David this whole yarn about a rich man and a poor man, and the rich man has a bunch of sheep, and the poor man only has one sheep that he loves and cares for like a daughter, and a traveler comes to visit the rich man, and instead of feeding the visitor one of his own numerous sheep, the rich man takes the poor man's sheep instead, and it's a really obvious allegory for what just happened with David and Uriah, except get this, the women are replaced with sheep. But David isn't the brightest, and he still doesn't get it, so he's like, that man's a dick! Throw him in jail! Jail for rich man! Jail for 1,000 years! And Nathan's like, but that man is you! And David's like, shit! And Nathan's like, yeah, so God's really angry at you, but fortunately, you are God's favorite special little boy. So he's not gonna kill you, but he is gonna kill your son that you had with Bathsheba. And David's like, dude. And Nathan's like, them's the breaks, kid. I don't make the rules. So David and Bathsheba's son gets sick and dies, but it's all fine, because in the end, they have another kid, and that kid turns out to be Solomon, who grows up to be the next king of Israel and has a very successful career slicing babies in half or whatever, so it's all cushy. Okay, so before we move on, there is one obligatory thing we must acknowledge. This story is sexist. It gets the official sexist stamp. I am a good feminist because I have pointed out that the thing is sexist. And it's sexist in a very classical sense, right? It's not in the modern sense of like cracking a bunch of misogynist jokes, but in the structural sense of treating women as chattel, as goods with value to be extracted. Nathan's sheep metaphor is perhaps more telling than he knows. David's sin is explicitly not that he got Bathsheba's husband killed for a shitty reason, it's that he coveted and stole Uriah's property. I would argue that this sexist framework is the real reason you shouldn't tell children the David and Bathsheba story, much more so than its raunchiness. You can have your own opinions about when it's okay to talk to children about sex, but in my humble opinion, sexism is just worse than sexiness. Morally speaking, I don't really care what David and Bathsheba get up to while her husband's away. I wish them many orgasms and much access to safe and legal abortion. And if the kids at home know about it, there are worse things. What I don't want the kids exposed to is the earnest belief that women should be treated like property. So in some ways, I agree that if you're gonna tell kids the Bathsheba story, which you shouldn't be doing at all, but I guess we're just plowing forward anyway, you do have to transform it a great deal. But because the Big Idea writers have misidentified the true source of the story's objectionable vibes, they transformed it weird. There were some gimmies right off the bat. Take the biblical setting, flip it to medieval / storybook fairy tale. King David becomes King George, the war with the Ammonites becomes the Great Pie War. Uriah becomes Thomas, David's military advisor Joab becomes Cedric. The prophet Nathan becomes the wise man Melvin, and insert an original anxious gay sidekick named Lewis, so King George has someone to talk to. But as for the lone woman of the story, the property being coveted and stolen, well, the obvious thing to do here is to simply render her as a toy. Because that's a thing that modern children inherently understand, right? We've all experienced jealousy over our classmates' cool toy that we cannot have because they have richer parents than us. And indeed, King George's behavior is coded as that of a spoiled kid, throwing a tantrum about a toy that he wants to take from another kid because he wants it, with no further justification needed in his mind.
What are you saying? That I shouldn't have whatever I want? I don't like these, I don't need these, I don't want these any longer.
But like, you guys realize that the problem with the David and Bathsheba story wasn't a dearth of opportunities to metaphorically render women as animals, right? That you have done precisely zilch to solve the original story's problematic moral framework. And you realize that it's only a matter of time before the kid watching this episode finds your behind-the-scenes featurette where you openly talk about its origins. The sexism of the Bible drowns King George and the Ducky in its own context before it even has a chance to breathe, and I'll be honest, it leaves an icky taste in my mouth. But okay, you know what? Let's take a breath, let's take a moment, and try and meet the episode on its own terms. Let's forget about the source material for a second and treat the ducks, not as women or as metaphors, but simply as ducks. Does King George and the Ducky work on its own as a self-contained parable for children? Selfishness is bad. I think we can all agree on this point. And children are often selfish. They have not yet learned to control their pleasure impulse, and this can often override their sense of empathy. So the big question here is, how does one cure selfishness?
I'll tell you. I don't know.
Look, if I know the answer here, I'd be living in a solar punk communist utopia getting sucked off by angels or whatever. But I have a few ideas. I think the empathy angle is a pretty good one. There is absolutely utility to Melvin's trick of telling King George his own story as a fiction. Sometimes the best way to catch someone in their moral hypocrisy is to encourage them to examine a disguised facsimile of their own logical process. In this instance, the story of the two men and the sheep lets King George examine the moral quandary with a bit of distance and objectivity. And the shock of the reveal gets him to look at his situation from the outside, considering for the first time him and Thomas as equal players. But honestly, that train of thought feels a little mature to me. Maybe I just wasn't a super empathetic kid, but I feel like Melvin's story wouldn't have worked on me back in the day. And for that matter, there's plenty of adults it would not work on either. In my experience, when you try to catch someone like King George in his own logic like that, King George doesn't change. King George doubles down and turns his ire onto Melvin. He gets defensive, rattling off a hasty list of all the ways he isn't actually like the rich man in the story. How could you even say that? He starts trying to like enumerate all the differences between sheep and rubber duckies and like outlining all the ways in which the two situations don't exactly add up. And if you start trying to argue with him, try and get into the weeds about the different economic and social roles of sheep versus ducks, he just gets more riled up, you just get more anxious and frazzled, and Passover is ruined once again. Because, you know, at this point in his life, George has staked so much of his identity on being the guy with the coolest, sexiest duck that any attack on the philosophical thrust of such an endeavor feels like a personal attack on him. Empathy isn't something you can force onto people. It has to be built over time. And even once you're done building, you have to be diligent about maintaining it. And it has to be voluntary. How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one. But the light bulb has to want to change. There's this great moment towards the end of King George and the Ducky, right before Melvin comes in to tell his story. King George and Louis have just gone on their Ocean's 11 heist and successfully stolen Thomas's rubber ducky. They arrive back in the palace, George basking in victory, Louis awash in shame, and King George literally puts the ducky on a pedestal so they can stand back and admire it. And Louis looks at the duck and he says,
"It looks just like your other duckies."
And watching the episode this time, I half expected King George to have a moment. I thought maybe he'd look at the new duck, see it on the pedestal, and wait for the fuzzy, effervescent feeling of happiness to bubble up inside him in the way he expected, and get nothing. And maybe for him to realize, hey, it does look the same as all my other duckies. I just committed like 7 different horrifying crimes, and all for what? It's a duck. It's just a duck. Now that might be a little dark, but I don't think it's that dark, especially given your source material. And I think that might have been a little more effective to me as a kid. A moment where we see the yawning spiritual emptiness wrought by selfishness. Where we learn in a subtle way that living without regard for the people around you will rot your soul from the inside. That you are better off finding sustainable sources of joy instead of that tiny little diminishing kick that you get from stepping on other people's heads on your rise to the top. But that's not what we get. Instead, King George looks at the duck and he's just as stoked as ever. He's all like, "Fuck are you saying? This duck is the coolest, sexiest duck. I couldn't be happier with my decision. Now draw me a bath so I can fuck this duck."
Goose that goose, gonna quack that swan, gonna rubber my ducky all night long.
And then Melvin comes in and straight up tells King George that he's wrong, and that's what convinces him. But wouldn't George be more willing to hear Melvin's tale if he had been primed for it, if his own folly had like gotten him partway there? I really like this episode, you guys. The jokes are funny, the fairy tale shtick is cute, and the songs all slap. I love the countertop framing device as well. Basically, Jimmy and Jerry Gord strong-armed their way into taking over hosting duties from Bob and Larry, and they are terrible at it. It's delightful, and The Englishman Who Went Up the Hill and Came Down with All the Bananas is a work of surrealist comedic genius. But perhaps the most significant development here is a visual one. Starting with this episode, VeggieTales and Big Idea Studios switched over to an entirely new animation software called Maya, and the effect of this change is extremely apparent. The story's main setting, King George's royal palace, is adorned with all these complex medieval architectural flourishes and patterns that simply would not have been possible with the old software. And while it's a little busy for my taste, it's certainly impressive. While I certainly understand the necessity of changing with the times, I can't help but be a little sad. I kind of loved the classic look of 90s VeggieTales. Because all the objects we saw on screen were so textureless and cartoonish, and because the characters' shapes were constantly squashing and unsquashing as they moved around in this goofy but nonetheless very rigid way, I don't know, there was something appealing about it. The textures we see with this new software do technically look a little more realistic, but I find that even that small drip of realism diminishes the magic a little bit. In this episode and a few afterwards, the eyeballs of the characters are actually reflective, like real eyes are. And I remember that even as a kid that weirded me out. I had never before considered the eyeball juices of my anthropomorphic vegetable friends, and once you knock that door open, you have to consider what other kinds of of bodily fluids they might possess, and that way lies madness. What I will say is that the new software is a huge step up in terms of lighting. The silly song Barbara Manatee in particular is greatly enhanced by the changes in light, color, and shadow as Larry flips between watching his soap opera and his romantic fantasy tango. When he's paying attention to the TV, the light is green and sickly, with the Venetian blinds on the window only allowing a smidgen of outside light in. But when the tango starts, these orange-yellow lights descend and make everything hot and intense and alive. And what is it with this episode and putting Larry in erotic situations with animals? Do I need to call somebody? King George and the Ducky is overall a mixed bag. It is philosophically sloppy at best, but it also shows a certain aesthetic maturity with visual and musical elements that far surpass anything that came before it. I find it extremely entertaining, but I am incredibly on the fence about showing it to a kid, so, you know, ball's in your court. Use your best judgment.
The battle is not ours. We look to God above.
Esther, the Girl Who Became Queen was one of the first VeggieTales I ever saw, and rewatching it now, I completely understand how it inspired the singular awe and obsession that I would maintain for the franchise for years to come. It is a multi-layered masterpiece, a sublime aesthetic experience that nonetheless carries a great deal of political heft. It held special meaning for me as a child, but coming back as an adult, I found its significance had expanded exponentially in its absence. This episode, of course, has a leg up on its peers in that it is adapted from one of the most cinematic and thrilling stories in the Hebrew Bible. Jews love the Book of Esther so much that we made an entire holiday about it. It's called Purim, and it's by far the second funnest holiday we got. The first one is, of course, Sukkot, because it's the only holiday that involves building a rad blanket fort in your backyard. Point being, narratively speaking, the Book of Esther has it all. I was gonna clap my hands for that bit, but I can't do it. It's got political intrigue, it's got secret murder plots, it's got twists and turns, it's got a likable heroine and a cartoonishly evil villain, it's got themes about power versus privilege and courage versus complacency. And like many Jewish holiday stories, at its heart, it's really a tale about Jews facing religious persecution in the diaspora and surviving by the skin of our teeth with the help of a little bit of luck, some elbow grease, and also God sometimes. That part's interesting though. Although the characters in this VeggieTale talk about God a lot, the original Megillah is one of the most atheist stories you will find in the Bible. Whereas in other Bible stories, God is out here pulling all kinds of crazy stunts and bestowing all kinds of crazy superpowers on his prophets. In the Book of Esther, God isn't even mentioned once. Both the challenge Esther faces and the eventual solution to it are both entirely human-made, and there's something supremely powerful in that. Basically, at the start of our story, King Xerxes of Persia is having a grand party and asks his wife, Queen Vashti, to do a sexy dance for all of his guests. She understandably refuses, a crime so heinous that she is immediately stripped of her queenly title and booted from the palace. In the VeggieTale, this is wisely amended to the king asking Vashti to make him a sandwich at 3 in the morning, which is not only hilarious, but also a neat way to keep things kid-friendly while preserving the cringeworthy sexism of the original gesture. In general, at every turn where King George and the Ducky fails at kidification, Esther succeeds. Anyway, King Xerxes immediately spearheads a nationwide search for a suitable replacement queen, and eventually he picks a young woman named Esther. Esther is Jewish and an orphan, raised by her cousin Mordecai, who works as a palace guard. Mordecai warns Esther not to reveal her Jewish heritage, because, you know, anti-Semitism, it's a thing. Anyway, soon after, two sneaky guys named Bigthan and Teresh attempt to assassinate King Xerxes, but thankfully Mordecai stops it. Somewhere during all this, Xerxes appoints a new viceroy named Haman, who is a real piece of work. Mordecai gets off on the wrong foot with Haman right away, because he's the only palace guard who refuses to bow down to him, and in retaliation, Haman hatches a sneaky little plot, sneakily obtaining the king's permission to execute all the Jews in Persia, which of course includes Mordecai. Mordecai finds out about this and goes running to Esther, being all like, "You're the queen, you've got to go to the king and stop this." But Esther, understandably, is fucking terrified. In Persia, showing up in the king's chambers if he hasn't summoned summoned you is a crime punishable by death, which seemed really harsh to me until I remembered that I basically have this rule too. Like, if you show up at my apartment and I haven't invited you and I'm not in the mood to socialize, I will absolutely deck a motherfucker. I don't give a shit. But anyway, Esther plucks up her courage and shows up unannounced before the king anyway. Thankfully, the king's a total sweetheart about it, and he's like, hey girl, whatever you want, it's yours. Is that good? Does that sound like a rapper being like, hey girl? Answers on a postcard, please. But instead of outing Haman then and there, she invites Haman and Xerxes to dinner that night.
You bet! We'd love to come. What time you want us over?
Say 8?
8 it is!
It's funny, nowadays that reads as a completely normal exchange, but when I was a kid, I was like, 8 o'clock? At night? That's crazy! That's almost bedtime! They really be freaks over there in Persia, man. It takes a couple tries on her part, but Esther eventually manages to spill that Haman is planning to execute not only all Jews in Persia, but by extension the king's actual wife, as well as Mordecai, aka the dude who literally saved the king from an assassination attempt the other day. King Xerxes is understandably pissed and orders that instead of the Jews, Haman himself shall be hanged on the very gallows he was gonna hang Mordecai on. Except in the VeggieTale they obviously can't say that, so they replace it with the just incredible PG substitute of being banished to the island of perpetual tickling, which is just great. Right? Like, what is the most terrifying thing to a child that, like, in their mind is the closest equivalent to a public hanging? Eternal tickling. It's genius, I say, genius! But also, can we please just take one moment to talk about this ominous robed bitch with the feather? I love this man more than I love some members of my immediate nuclear family. This legend spends all damn day, as well as all damn night, hiding behind various doors in the palace, waiting for someone to mention the island of perpetual tickling, just so he can burst in, brandishing his enormous fucking feather to the sound of scary gothic organ music. It's so good. It's the serve, the look, the dedication to one's craft. May we all, at some point in our sad, meager lives, achieve even a smidgen of this man's professionalism and artistry. God, this episode fucks so hard. So obviously, the first thing we have to discuss here is this episode's noir influences. As we've discussed, the Book of Esther is already quite moody, with lots of behind-the-scenes political plotting and devious machinations, so the genre is a natural fit. The folks at Big Idea have stated that they took lots of influence from mob movies like The Godfather, as well as classic noir like Casablanca. And you can see the direct parallels in some scenes. In particular, the Venetian blinds and the resultant shadows in Xerxes' throne room are lifted straight from Double Indemnity. However, my favorite noir-inspired shots in Esther are the ones that I couldn't find direct inspirations for. The ones that come from a deeper understanding of the language and visual flourishes of the genre. I love this overhead shot from above the ceiling fan, the blades only black silhouettes that obscure our view and make us feel voyeuristic and unsettled. And I'm a particular fan of these lamps in the palace hallway that throw harsh yellow lines of illumination onto the wall, marking a clear border between the light and the dark. The improvements in lighting that we mentioned last time are kicked up to their fullest potential here, as well as the new software's ability to render complex patterns in the set design. This story is only set in Persia in the most second-hand referential sense, but the references to actual Persian rugs are a nice nod at least, and they fit quite well within the 1930s aesthetic. Overall, the visual design of Esther the Girl Who Became Queen serves to create an incredible atmosphere of tension, suspense, and dread that not only accentuates the darkness of the source material, but makes the jokes pop in a way never before seen in VeggieTales. Because the world around it is so oppressive and soaked in desperation, the humor in this episode has a sharp edge, each joke stabbing into you like a glass shard. The character design is also firing on all cylinders here. Haman's evil little maroon pinstripe suit and fedora, iconic. The king's little navy blue number, very cool. Mordecai's shiny little guard hat with the hood that makes him just a little bit badass and mysterious, incredible. As for Esther's design, it's clear that at the time, she provided something of a challenge to the all-male team of animators. Watching the behind-the-scenes figurette, it's clear they wanted her to have something resembling Hollywood ingenue vibes, leading to one or two cringeworthy moments.
We wanted her to look special. We wanted her to look charming. We didn't want to just take another
pickle and put eyelashes on it. And we wanted her to look attractive as much as we could.
Guys, we gotta make sure everybody wants to fuck this onion. Fucking the onion sounds like a phrase, like an idiom. Like I feel like fucking the onion is like when you fuck something up so badly that you start to cry. Like, oh dang, boys, we really fucked the onion on this one. Point is, Esther gets a veritable smorgasbord of feminine-coded visual signifiers. Her onion body is given the suggestion of curves, a sentence I really resent that I have to say. They slimmed down her nose, gave her some classic shy girl protagonist hair to hide behind, and slapped some lipstick on there. And perhaps most importantly, her eyes are quite different to any veggie character we've seen before. She's got irises! What a knockout! And like, yeah, I really understand why this design rubs some fans the wrong way. It is perhaps a little insulting that they thought they had to yassify Esther in order to get us to take her seriously as a female hero. They didn't do anything like this with Madame Blueberry, but Madame Blueberry spends most of her episode being the butt of the joke, and is therefore entitled to the same goofy design as Bob and Larry. But honestly, that's kinda why this works for me. Esther's struggle is both more dark and more gendered than any of our previous protagonists. So she kind of has to look more grave, more sober and deliberate, more like a helpless Hollywood starlet of the noir era. Throughout the episode, I find myself taking her seriously. Partly because her situation is serious, partly because her dialogue is serious, she never once cracks a joke, but also, for better or for worse, it's because of her unique and striking visual design. Esther's story is an exercise in disempowerment. She doesn't kill any giant pickles in single combat, or bring down an enemy stronghold, or survive a fiery furnace. Per the patriarchal structures of her society, those things are the domain of men, and her own freedom and agency are extremely curtailed. For the first 2 acts of this episode, not only does she not do much, she isn't even presented with the opportunity. It's not her choice to get rounded up in the king's search for a new wife. It's not her choice that the king likes her best and makes her queen. It's not her choice that she becomes her people's only chance for survival, or that it's her life on the line if she wants to do something about it. And she is rightfully pissed about all of this!
Esther, there is no other way. You are the only one who can stop this.
No, I'm not gonna. I didn't even want to be the queen. No, you're smart, Mordecai. Think of another way.
And here enters an interesting bit of tension with the text. For the first time since Rakshak and Benny, we have a narrative moral that is at direct odds with the stated moral. Mordecai responds to Esther's objections with this.
You wanted to know why you were here, why you became queen. I told you God must have a reason. Esther, perhaps he put you here for such a time as this.
But like, God didn't put her there, dude. Haman and Xerxes put her there. The monarchy the patriarchy put her there.
Esther, you never have to be afraid to do what's right.
You kinda do. In a deeply unjust world, there is always something to be feared from doing the right thing. In fact, one of the things I like most about this episode is the many ways the audience is encouraged to empathize with Esther's fear.
All right, so she was a little nervous. Give her a break.
Everything about these scenes leading up to and containing her decision to go talk to the king, the first proper decision she gets to make in the story, serves to put us in her shoes. Her somber musical soliloquy on the balcony, the tense cinematography in the throne room. We are made to feel how scary this is and how brave she is for doing it anyway. Nor does the story chastise her for delaying her task with the dinner party invite, even though time is of the essence. At every turn, her overpowering fear at the task she's been given is presented as legitimate, understandable, and relatable. Esther is incredibly privileged in some ways, she's the queen, and incredibly oppressed in others, she's a woman in a sexist society. She never wanted the institutional power that's been given to her, but you know, tough shit, she has it anyway. It was given to her not by God, but by sheer dumb luck and the careless machinations of a cruel and illogical system. And that is terrifying, and it's a burden that should never have been placed on her, but she has a responsibility to use it well anyways. And I don't know, for some reason, I'm finding that really relatable these days. Going to a protest is scary. There might be cops there, you know? There might be Zionist counter-protesters there. You could get seriously hurt, even if you do everything right, everything you were always told to do as a peaceful protester. But you still have a moral duty to do it, but also, it's okay to be scared. The people you're protesting for are scared too. Why would they begrudge you your fear? Unless, of course, that fear goads you to inaction. Protests are only necessary because we are so powerless as individuals. I can't change economic systems by sitting here and talking to my camera. And I can only devote so much time to saving the world when I got bills to pay, right? I mean, that's part of the point of capitalism, to keep you so busy saving your own ass that you become blind to the asses of those around you. But it is still worth doing. I was originally going to critique Esther, the girl who became queen, for one particular change it makes from the original Bible story, which it otherwise hews pretty close to. There are a number of other small changes that I think work to make the story a little more cinematic and fit a bit more into our modern narrative sensibilities. Inserting Haman a little earlier in the story, for instance, making him more active in the king's queen-seeking operations and establishing his hatred for Mordecai right off the bat, makes everything that happens to him later way more satisfying. The significant change here, though, is that in the Bible story, it is made abundantly clear that Haman is trying to exterminate all Jews who live in Persia, and that he hates Mordecai, at least in part, because he is a Jew. In the VeggieTale, this is adjusted to just being Mordecai and Esther's family. You remember back in part 1 when I said this? Although since it's VeggieTales, and this is an important note, he's arrested for praying to God, because VeggieTales doesn't like to use the words Jews or Jewish. That was originally intended to be a bit of a subtweet about this episode. My one criticism of Esther, which is otherwise probably my favorite VeggieTale of all time, is that as a piece of Christian entertainment, it has no choice but to lose the specificity of Jewishness that is so integral to the original story, and I was, you know, a little offended by that. But yeah, I don't know, for some reason these days I'm trying to be a little more careful about throwing around accusations of anti-Semitism. Does it behoove me to throw that label at a work that I genuinely believe aligns with my values? I don't know. Maybe it's good to point it out regardless. But also, I'm extremely wary of how many people in positions of power right now, most notably government officials in both the US and Israel, are misusing the label of anti-Semitism to justify genocide. It turns out, if you just accuse your enemies of being unwoke enough times, you can do whatever the hell you want. And anyway, re-watching the episode for this project, I kinda liked that this change gives Esther's struggle a little more universality. I don't know, I just feel like sometimes American Jews can build up such a fucking persecution complex that we find it hard to accept when we find ourselves with any amount of, like, privilege or influence. Or worse, when we find ourselves, you know, the oppressor. Because that's the hard truth of the matter, right? Is that there is no hard line between oppressor and oppressed. No people is possessed of such pure divine spirit that they are incapable of becoming bigots if placed in the right circumstances. Israel itself is a great fucking example. One thing the veggies don't show you is that after Esther is like, Haman is trying to kill my entire people, the king does what he does in the episode and tells Haman to fuck right off. But in the Bible story, the king doesn't have the political power to annul one of his previous decrees. Since his word is supposed to be law, he can't release a decree canceling an earlier one. The gallows are all set up and the Jews of Persia are still scheduled to be executed all across the land. So what they do instead is issue another decree, this time basically just giving the Jews official permission to fight back against anyone who tries to kill them. And they do. The story makes it clear that the following weeks turn into a fucking bloodbath. And while I cannot find it within me to condemn those fictional Persian Jews for that, nor do I condemn anyone forced to use violent means to defend themselves against genocide, it's a sober reminder that none of this is fucking easy. There is always going to be a cost, and it's okay to be scared of that cost, as long as we find the courage within ourselves to do the right thing anyway, to be like Esther. Anyway. This VeggieTale's really good. Songs all slap. 10 out of 10. And I'm gonna go and stare in a mirror for 5 hours and then maybe throw a Molotov cocktail at something. I don't know. Night's still young. We'll play it by ear. We'll figure it out as we go. Jesus Christ.
We're Vikings. What will you know? The terrors of the sea. We're Vikings.
Lyle and the Kindly Viking kind of reminds me of a meringue cookie. It's extraordinarily impressive, and there's a great deal of artistry on display. It's delicious, it melts in your mouth. But at the end of the day, it feels a little more like candy than it does a proper full dessert. It's a bit immaterial, you know? Once it melts in your mouth, the only aftertaste is a straightforward sweetness that is nice, certainly, but also feels like you could have gotten it from anywhere. As we open, Bob is once again guilted into letting someone else host the show after the show has already started filming. What must it be like to work on the crew of VeggieTales? Truly the most disorganized set in Hollywood. Anyway, Archibald Asparagus takes over so he can tell the kids some stories about the importance of sharing. And true to form, he is insistent on bringing a sort of PBS masterpiece theater vibe to VeggieTales. But being British, he doesn't actually do any of the work himself, outsourcing it to the French Peas with predictably disastrous results. Instead of putting on a production of Shakespeare's Hamlet, they've put on a production of Shakespeare's Omelette, a goofy little parody starring Jerry Gord as the central angsty prince of Denmark. Except instead of wondering if he should avenge his father's death at his uncle's hand, he's like, hey, maybe I should share this omelette with my starving citizens instead of, you know, not sharing. And like, far be it for me to shit on a cute little skit that explicitly advocates for the redistribution of resources from the ruling class. But also, Prince Omelette, upon receiving his eggs cooked light and fluffy, doesn't eat them and just kind of carries around the plate for the rest of the play. By the time your subjects get their forks in there, those eggs are going to be cold and flaky and disgusting. Omelets are good for like 5 minutes after they come off the stove, dude. You are wasting more food than if you just immediately scarf down the whole thing. Anyway, we all get it. Sharing's good. Let's keep it moving. Now, because Archibald can't suffer the idea of one of Larry's silly songs bringing down the highbrow timbre of his show, the segment is replaced with the first and only classy song with Larry, entitled Larry's High Silk Hat. On the surface, it is a parody of the Italian song Funicoli Funicola, which was apparently originally written in 1880 to commemorate the opening of a railroad near Mount Vesuvius? That Mount Vesuvius? Jesus Christ. Too soon, man. R.I.P. Pompeii. Hashtag never forget. Anyway, perhaps because I've been a bit oversaturated with it in my life, I do not like the tune of Funicoli Funicola. It does not slap. Much like the Italians themselves, it is loud and annoying and distractingly horny. But interestingly, and unbeknownst to me before writing this section, Larry's High Silk Hat is actually a parody of a different parody of Funicoli Funicola. Published in 1933, the song My High Silk Hat tells the story of a narrator who, riding the subway, places his hat on the seat next to him and is dismayed when, quote, a big fat lady came and sat upon it, end quote, which feels like shitty and mean and fatphobic, right? Like, unless she was made of clouds, a skinny woman would have crushed your hat just as easily, and you still would have deserved it for taking up 2 seats on public transit when you did not need to take up 2 seats. Anyway, my point here is that as a piece of musical comedy, Larry's High Silk Hat is built upon 2 distinct yet equally unfunny foundations, and oh boy, does it show. Larry plays the role of the guy from the High Silk Hat song, but also Forrest Gump for some reason, with the feather and the white pants and the box of chocolates that's a lot like life. It is so dense with inspirations that it has no room to breathe. The jokes don't land because I can neither root for Harry and his dumbass hat that does not go with that outfit, nor feel any satisfaction when he gets his comeuppance. Still, the song possesses a certain comedic verve, and I like the joke at the end, but you know, it's fine. 4 out of 10. And this is an utterly superfluous side note, but can we take a moment to appreciate this YouTube video I found of this random lady singing the My High Silk Hat song?
Oh, big fat lady came and sat right on it. My high silk hat. My high silk hat.
I wish I had as much fun doing anything in my life. Once the silly song concludes, we finally get to the main attraction. Archibald has tasked the French Peas with finding the long-rumored lost musical of Gilbert and Sullivan, and boy oh boy do they find a banger. Lyle the Kindly Viking opens on a quaint little old-timey Viking island with— holy shit! Are those the asparagus and pear ladies from Daniel and the Lion's Den? Where the hell have they been? If you think you can just show up here after 8 years and steal the entire fucking show yet again with nothing but a single comedic verse of a much longer song, you would be absolutely correct. They sing a lovely little intro about what it's like being married to Vikings. I guess only 2 of the Vikings have wives. The rest just hang out with each other in hammocks on A boat? Look, it's fine. It doesn't count as gay if it's at sea. Anyway, the opening number, We're Vikings, absolutely slaps. According to the behind-the-scenes featurette, Phil Vischer was worried that all of his songs were starting to sound the same, and so he listened to a bunch of Gilbert and Sullivan musicals to prepare for this episode. And honestly, it shows. VeggieTales songs have been on an incredible kick the last few episodes, but something about Lyle the Kindly Viking as a musical feels uniquely elevated. Every song just absolutely fucks. I'm sure a music theory guy could explain why in detail, but yeah, I don't know. The wordplay in the lyrics is on point, the melodies are on fleek, the singing is, snatched? I've run out of young person slang. Anyway, after We're Vikings, we are introduced to Lyle, the Viking Island's resident cute little guy. While the other Vikings go out to pillage and plunder from neighboring islands, Lyle is content to stay at home making potholders. He also makes mysterious little solo trips in his cute little boat. The head Viking, Olaf, no relation, sings a sultry, jazzy little number about how suspicious he finds this, which once again slaps. So two of the Vikings, Sven and Otar, decide to follow Lyle on one of his mysterious boat trips in order to find out what he's up to. And can I just say, Sven and Otar are the most married that Bob and Larry have ever been.
I'm just trying to...
A little closer. No, too close. No.
Would you just...
Then, in this lovely little down-tempo number that doesn't so much slap as it rocks you gently to sleep, they discover that Lyle, against all Viking rules and codes and social mores, is giving his share of the stolen loot back to the people from whomst the Vikings stole it, and also making them potholders. And so when he gets back, Sven and Otar confront Lyle, at which point Lyle sings a cute little song about how stealing things is mean and sharing is good, actually, at which point Sven and Otar come around instantly and decide to protect Lyle's secret. But of course in the next scene, Lyle's secret comes out almost immediately when Olaf spots Lyle giving even more plundered loot back to the monks. Olaf, being a mean old Viking who's played by Mr. Nezer, naturally tries to murder Lyle by fucking up his boat's sails as a storm begins to descend. But thankfully, the monks save him because Lyle was nice and he shared with them. Anyway, the storm gets worse and the Vikings are all about to drown, and the monks are all like, ugh, do we have to save the Vikings too? They were mean to us and they don't share. And Lyle is all like, come on. And the monks are like, okay, fine. So the monks save the Vikings, everybody's friends now, and the Vikings decide to change their ways and share. And it's nice and it's cute and I like it. Okay, so a couple things about this. Number one, as much as the music feels like a step up, the visuals in Lyle the Kindly Viking feel like a distinct step down. This is, I think, at least partially deliberate. The vibe they're going for is specifically the 1983 movie version of Pirates of Penzance, starring Kevin Kline and Angela Lansbury, with its very simple sets and monochromatic backgrounds. And this also works with the storybook vibe suggested by Archibald's framing device, namely that he's reading from a literal musical pop-up book. That being said, it is especially entertaining to watch this episode in concert with Jonah, a VeggieTales movie, which was released not too long after Lyle and was almost certainly being worked on concurrently. Look at this ocean! Now look at this ocean! Can you tell which one had a bunch of money and time and attention thrown at it, and which one just absolutely looks like shit? Moving on to the philosophy of it all, I don't know. There is, I suppose, a critique to be made here about all the ways the sharing presented on screen does not map onto the types of sharing your audience is most likely to participate in. Prince Omelette, for instance, is not a kid on the playground refusing to share his candy. He is a member of the monarchy, with all the imbalances in resources and power one might expect from such an institution. This man simply would not share his eggs with such meager provocation. He has no incentive to share his eggs, and every incentive to keep his people at least some level of impoverished. If you want those eggs cooked light and fluffy, you have no choice but to chop off the prince's head and distribute the eggs amongst the people yourself. Likewise, in portraying a fictionalized version of historical colonizers, Lyle the Kindly Viking has no choice but to dip its toe into real-world politics with predictably sloppy results. It is made clear here that the Vikings' entire society is based on traveling around and stealing stuff from other cultures. Saying that they need to learn to share is an utter misdiagnosis, not least because they're already good at sharing, as long as it is only with each other. They even use the word.
Here's your share of the loot, Lyle.
Here's your share of the loot, Lyle.
Lyle didn't even do any of the work, but he still gets a cut. That's socialism in action, baby! And much like real Scandinavian socialism, everything is fine and dandy on Viking Island, as long as you don't think too hard about where all this wealth originally came from. The Vikings' generosity with each other blinds them to the cruelty they push onto other groups, something which this episode seems really devoted to straight up ignoring.
Could sharing actually give them more of what would make them really happy? Even they had noticed that watching that big screen TV wasn't all that fun by yourself.
They're not by themselves, dude. They watch the big screen TV with all of their Viking buddies. That's how they dodge the guilt. Now, all of this political critique honestly feels a little unfair. One of the biggest hurdles you have to jump through as a critic is to meet the story on its own terms. And Lyle the Kindly Viking isn't asking you to consider colonialism or monarchy as legitimate forces that enact their will upon the world. It is just using them for easy storytelling shorthand in order to facilitate goofy hijinks. But this still leaves us with the problem that while every VeggieTales episode does inevitably have this turn to the camera moment where we are told the moral outright, in this episode, something about the sharing is good message feels uniquely unconnected from anything happening around it. As much as I hate to keep coming back to this talking point, I don't think this episode would have been effective on me as a child. There are two eureka moments in this episode that are supposed to press upon us the benefits of sharing. In Omelette, Prince Omelette has a moment where he shares his eggs with Percy P and experiences an unexpected hit of emotional satisfaction.
Ha! Sharing! You know, that wasn't so bad. Actually, it felt pretty good.
There, the emphasis is on how sharing, much like busting, makes you feel good. Later, in Lyle the Kindly Viking, Lyle preaches to his friends about the social effectiveness of sharing.
When I share, I get my share of friends.
God damn it! That's cute! But Juvenile Aaron would have two immediate, succinct rebuttals to these. Number one, sharing does not feel good. You know, it feels good hoarding all my cool toys and keeping everything for myself. And number two, I already have friends, and guess what? They're assholes. And I'm just supposed to give my stuff to assholes? If you want to get a sense of my early childhood friendships, all you really have to do is just watch The Big Bang Theory. But also, if you want to enjoy your life, you should, under no circumstances, watch The Big Bang Theory. So I guess maybe you could just trust me on this one. Anyway, this got me thinking about why I enjoy sharing so much as an adult, whereas I absolutely despised it as a kid. These days, I share all the time, even and especially when I don't have much. I am constantly stressing about having enough money to buy groceries, cough, patreon.com/Aaron Lockman cough. But I still invite my friends over to cook dinner for them. I lend books to people, I share my streaming passwords, and most importantly, I lend my skills out to people. There's nothing I love more than punching up a friend's cover letter or giving them constructive notes on a writing project, so, you know, what's the difference? Well, after a bit of deliberation, I think I figured it out. Sharing sucks when it's your parents telling you to share. When you decide to share of your own accord, that shit feels incredible. And of course that ties into things like the power and agency that comes with adulthood. As a child, everything I own comes from my parents, and my parents, not the most dependable people on the planet, especially when it comes to buying me the cool shit that I want. I don't know when or whether I am ever going to acquire more cool shit. I gotta ration my shit out. I can't be just tossing it around willy-nilly and higgledy-piggledy like some sort of tiny Jewish Santa Claus. Whereas nowadays, it is not that I exert complete control over the things I do and do not have. It's just that as an adult, I have an understanding of how the flow of stuff works and some amount of agency over it. And importantly, it's my stuff. I get to choose what to do with it. The fact that I don't have to share if I don't want to makes those positive share feels hit harder when I decide to do it. Lyle the Kindly Viking is able to impart a lot of joy while it is telling kids that sharing is good. But it doesn't, and perhaps can't, solve the underlying issue of why precisely kids hate sharing so much. In a world where we all had enough resources and luxuries to live entirely free of the anxieties wrought by scarcity, perhaps sharing would come more naturally to us in our formative years. As it stands, Lyle the Kindly Viking is the best we got, and you know what? We sure could do a lot worse. Anyway, the moral of this episode is that you cannot trust the French. Moving on! David, didn't we, just do a Christmas episode last time? Oh, okay. There's a bunch of these. Are you sure we have the budget for that? Alright. Your funeral. I have just been informed that there is nobody over there, and I am indeed shouting at nothing. In other news, I think my whole life might be a fiction. Look, I know and you know that the Christmas episodes are never going to be my favorite, but that doesn't mean that the Star of Christmas doesn't have anything worth saying. As has become a bit of a pattern, however, the most interesting things about it are almost entirely accidental and unconnected to the stated Christian moral. The Star of Christmas, much to my surprise, is a story about how to be true to yourself as an artist, especially in an artistic industry that incentivizes commercialism and empty spectacle. I find this struggle relevant to myself, certainly, but I also find it relevant in a paratextual sense to the creators of VeggieTales. It's hard not to read this one as extremely autobiographical and more than a little tragic. Let's dive in. We open in Victorian London. Two composers, Millward Phelps and Cavis Apithart, played by Larry and Bob respectively, are preparing to open their latest musical at Uncle Nezer's Theatre. Millward seems to be mostly in it for the shits and giggles, but Cavis has big ambitions for The Princess and the Plumber. Namely, he wants to teach all of London to love, with light bulbs. But as Cavis soon discovers, there's a Christmas pageant happening the same night, namely Christmas Eve, which will feature a historical artifact known as the Star of Christmas. The pageant is sure to attract more attention and draw more crowds than Cavis and Millward's silly little musical. So Cavis hatches a devious plan to steal the Star of Christmas and use it in his show instead. And thankfully, this plan goes off without a hitch. Just kidding. Cavis's hubris ends up burning the theater down, landing him and Millward in jail. Anyway, I can't say I super see the wisdom in using the priceless artifact you just stole from a church as a marketing strategy. Look at me, I committed a crime! Although, presidential campaigns have been one on less, so who might I talk? Point being, the illogic and foolhardiness of Cavis's plan here is part of the point. Cavis's whole motivation is that he and Millward are most famous not for any of the musicals they've written which they care about, but for a jingle they once composed for an advertisement.
You want to hear the song? For Happy Jills and Happy Jacks, use Derling's famous dental wax. Yes, sir. It's a winner.
It's a little unclear how there's a jingle when radio hasn't been invented yet, but who cares? Point is, I think a lot of us can relate. Fame, even niche internet fame, is a fickle mistress over which you have very little control. And Cavis is not wrong for wanting to leverage this shallow fame into a more fulfilling artistic career. However, Cavis possesses absolutely no clarity about what he really wants. Take his statement of intent in the first scene.
If I could do one thing, just one thing, I'd teach all of London to love.
And contrast it with his demeanor in this scene, which wraps up the story's first act.
Now maybe that isn't important to you two. Maybe you're thinking, oh, there's plenty of love out there. This town is full of love!
Cavis's mistake is not only that he conflates his own career success with the emotional well-being of the wider English public. It is also that in his single-minded obsession with achieving his goals, he has forgotten his reason for achieving them in the first place. Spreading joy and love is a worthy endeavor, but no endeavor is so worthy that it necessitates yelling at your coworkers and guilting them into helping you steal shit you don't need. These actions facilitate neither joy nor love, Cavis. They facilitate the opposite. But, to paraphrase Fitzgerald, I think those of us who might scoff at Cavis do so on the courage of his liquor. I've done this. I've gotten so wrapped up in ensuring the success of one of my creative projects that I become a mean, nasty bitch. I begin operating from a place not of genuine artistic vision, but of ego-stroking authoritarian vanity. And guess what? Our media landscape encourages that shit. We live in an attention economy. We are incentivized to Timbuktu and back to just get eyes on our shit at all cost. Social media has intensified this, but of course this phenomenon predates it. Phil Vischer's autobiography, Me, Myself, and Bob, is honestly a bit of a harrowing read. There's a lot of undisguised pain and resentment in it. It's like staring deep into an open wound. The book chronicles Phil's journey creating VeggieTales and eventually growing the brand into a mainstream sensation. But then in the book's back half, the reader is made to witness the downfall and subsequent bankruptcy of Big Idea Studios in excruciating detail. And like all tragedy, at the core of the story story is hubris. The way he describes it, Phil was trying to do two things with VeggieTales. Number one was to fulfill his Christian duty of selfless proselytizing, using his animated vegetables to grow his ministry and spread the word of God. Number two was to build a successful and profitable company. In his mind, the two goals were inextricably linked. The bigger the company is, the more mainstream respectability the brand gains, the more people Phil can bring his message to. And in linking these two things, Phil buys into the central lie of capitalism, that of the inherent goodness of infinite exponential growth. Now again, I'm not a history guy, but given that Phil Vischer is the sole credited writer of The Star of Christmas, as well as how chaotic and shitty his life was at this particular juncture in the company's history, it's very difficult not to see Kavis as a bit of a self-insert character. His struggles between creativity and business are Phil's exact struggles. Like Phil, he is a bit corrupted by the system inside which he is forced to make art. And the sad thing about all this? It ends tragically for both Phil and Kavis. Kavis's hubris and avarice burns the theater down. Phil got booted from the company that he sacrificed everything to create. But, like Phil does in the end, Kavis is ultimately able to find some meaning in his failure. The dudes from the church Kavis and Millward have just stolen from come and bail them out of jail. There follow some delightful shenanigans with a rocket-powered car, after which Kavis gets to view the very Christmas pageant he was so intent on screwing over. And in doing so, he experiences a much-needed moment of clarity.
I think I understand.
What's that?
Huh? Oh! There's only one story that can really show us how to love. And this is it.
Holy shit, I hope that's not the case. Jesus Christ. I'd be fucking screwed, man. I suppose I'll just never learn how to love. But for Kavis, and in a way for Phil, I get it. It's essential in any creative endeavor to remember why you started doing it in the first place. To no matter how big you get, remain able to summon that tiny little twinge of joy that you got at the beginning before anyone knew your name. Thankfully, however, the tone of this episode is not nearly as depressing as its subject matter might indicate. For one thing, it's kind of just a lot more fun to watch Bob be evil than it was to watch Larry do it back in King George. Larry was always the more juvenile acting of the pair, and so when he is evil, it's in a visibly childlike tantrumy way. And that energy just isn't all that fun. Bob was always the more high-strung and ambitious one, so seeing him take his neuroticism to the extreme is just kinda satisfying? I don't know, I've just always kind of been a sucker for a character who is evil because they are tired and because they are stressed. Why? I don't know. Maybe I find it relatable. Get off my dick. Also, I just love this scene where Kavis is scheming about what to do next, and Seymour is trying to get this light bulb set up, and the joke is just so obviously telegraphed. Like, you know for the whole scene that it's gonna end with the light bulb going off above Kavis's head as he gets his idea. But then right before the punchline, Kavis hits the camera with this devious little Grinch smile, and then the light bulb goes off, and it's just great. In general, the humor in this episode is quite on point, even as the music takes a distinct step backward. We only get one non-diegetic musical number here. The opening number, Our Big Break, is the only song sung by characters as part of the story itself, and it's the only one that slaps even a little bit. All the other songs are part of the fictional show, The Princess and the Plumber, and they're all bad. Hey Kavis, Millward, maybe the reason nobody wants to see your show is that you can't write songs for shit. I'm honestly not sure what the problem was. The songs were all composed by Phil Vischer as per usual, although they were arranged by someone other than Kurt Heineke for the first time ever. And also this episode was being produced as the company was like imploding in on itself, so maybe that's the answer right there. Anyway, that's most of what I have to say about this one. There's some Jesus-y stuff in here that doesn't quite work for me. There's a character played by Junior Asparagus called Edmund, who's in charge of putting on the pageant at the church and gets a bit anal and Kavis-y about it, myopically devoted to the spectacle and prestige of the pageant rather than the true meaning of Christmas. But then his turnaround happens entirely off screen, so it doesn't really land. There are both thematic and aesthetic echoes of A Christmas Carol, of course, with the emphasis on generosity and charity as being part of the spirit of the holiday. And there is, of course, the lovely detail that Kavis and Millward are supposed to be parodies of Gilbert and Sullivan themselves, with their wordplay-filled songs and the posters of the Mikado and HMS Pinafore on the wall in their office. But perhaps predictably, none of this really hits me in the way that being an artist under capitalism stuff does. Still, I like the start of Christmas. It's not my favorite, but it's quaint and it's cute and I like it. And of course I'd be lying if I said I didn't get a lovely, happy little twinge in my shriveled Grinch heart in the final scene when Cavus and Millward bring food to their friend that they met whilst they were in jail for burglary and property destruction. No idea what he was in jail for. He could have been a horrific murderer, but hey, you know what? Let him out anyway. It's Christmas.
Oh, Joe, oh, little Joe.
I remember with perfect clarity the morning that I realized there was no God. I was 11 years old. It was breakfast time. I was eating my waffles. I looked into my mother's eyes and I saw nothing, just a great big black yawning starless void. I said to her, "Your relationship is meaningless. What is a mother but a shackle to an outdated paradigm?" Then I threw the plate of waffles in her face, walked out of the house, stole a pack of cigarettes from the first crust punk I saw, and then fucked a drag queen in the bathroom of a Taco Bell. I never looked back. I suppose for some, the atheist revelation is a destabilizing one, but honestly, my childhood conception of God caused me nothing but anxiety. You're telling me there's a guy in the sky whose job it is to just watch me at all times? He sees me when I'm sleeping. He knows when I'm awake. If I go to the bathroom and I don't wash my hands and I don't tell anybody, he alone will judge me with his all-seeing eye. I suppose that's kind of reassuring in a macro sense. I suppose I should be washing my hands. But also, maybe washing my hands is good for its own sake. Like maybe I, Aaron Lockman, should choose to wash my hands so that I, Aaron Lockman, don't spread disease. Even if I never know about the disease I spread, hell, even if the microbes from my rank shit harmlessly dissipate before they can hurt anybody, isn't it better to hold myself to some baseline standard? Shouldn't I choose my own morality and enact it of my own volition? What does the panopticonical thread of an all-seeing God do exactly besides force me to live in fear? Is that perhaps the point? I've often heard it said that there's nothing more Jewish you can be than an atheist. The word Israel, and here I don't mean the modern perversion of a nation state, but the word in its original meaning, as in the Israelites, as in the Jews as a whole, literally means he who wrestles with God. To be Jewish is to wrestle with your faith, to argue with others about the meaning of the text. And devoting one's life to such an endeavor means reckoning with the fact that the argument has no final arbiter. There is only the argument itself, as chaotic and unpleasant as it is eternal, but nonetheless still worth participating in. As a wise vampire once said, if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do. In the fantastic Avatar: The Last Airbender graphic novel titled The Promise, written by Gene Luen Yang, there is a subplot where Zuko, now the crowned ruler of the Fire Nation after a lifetime of being an outcast, goes to visit his father in prison. Zuko is facing a moral dilemma, and despite the fact that Ozai is a fascist, a dictator, and a war criminal, he is the one person in all the world with whom Zuko shares the very singular experience of being the Fire Lord. Zuko wants to know how to handle the pressures of the throne, how to sleep at night knowing that your decisions affect the fate of an entire nation. In response, Ozai tells a story from Zuko's childhood. One time, while the family was at the beach, little Zuko saw a hawk attacking a turtle crab. Zuko rushed in to save the turtle crab's life, perceiving it as a defenseless creature that needed his help. But then he turned and saw the hawk and realized that in saving the turtle crab, he was condemning the hawk to starve. What should he do? What is the moral outcome in that situation? Later in the book, Zuko comes back to Ozai's cell. He says, "Father, I've realized the moral of your story. I should have sided with the hawk. It was stronger than the turtle crab, so it deserved to win the battle." And Ozai says, "Nah, that's not right." And Zuko's like, "Wait, so you're saying I should have sided with the turtle crab?" And Ozai's like, "No, Zuko, you're missing the point. I'm saying there is no right or wrong in this world apart from what you decide. As the Fire Lord, you have the power to choose what is right, to impose your will upon the world. Stop being afraid of using it. Now, of course, Ozai means this in an authoritarian way, but like all good villain advice, there is a grain of truth within it, which is that once Zuko has made his decision, nobody's gonna, like, come along and give him a stamp of right or wrong. There are the actions he takes, and there are the consequences. You can make educated guesses about which actions will cause which consequences, and whether those consequences will be positive or negative, but that's it. I realized this the first time I had a bedbug infestation in my apartment. It was relatively early in my adulthood, and I must confess, I was still in that insane gifted kid mindset of wanting to get a good grade in bug infestation. There were several ways I could have handled it, and I wanted to pick the one that was the best, the most effective, the A+ist version of events. But that feeling of finality never came. Nobody ever gave me a grade or a trophy or a certificate. But hey, the bugs are gone now. In order to survive in this world, in order to adjust to the moral grayness that pervades everyday life at every level, you must cultivate an inner sense of morality. And that shit is hard. It's no wonder a lot of people don't bother with it. But I must stress that I cannot recommend this way of life enough. It is, simply put, less complicated and less stressful. The path from idle desire to desired outcome is straighter, less burdened by external bullshit. But of course, everything I've discussed so far paints humans as entirely autonomous agents within this world. Zuko is a monarch, you are not, and as a result, a good chunk of your life is probably going to happen to you, rather than being orchestrated by you. In the opening countertop scene of The Ballad of Little Joe, Bob and Larry receive a letter from a child named Pete, who is sad because all of his friends got put in a different elementary school class this year, and he's not going to see them as much as he would like. And in response, they tell him the story of Joseph from the Book of Genesis, which is in many ways a spiritual antecedent to the slightly more popular Book of Job. It's about a super decent stand-up guy who has a whole bunch of horrible shit happen to him for no other reason then he's surrounded by jealous bitches who resent him for being so gosh darn cool. If Joseph does have a character flaw, it's that he is, in fairness, incredibly fucking annoying. Yeah, sure, his brothers sell him into slavery, but like, if my brother came to the breakfast table bragging about this great dream he had last night, in which metaphorical representations of the whole family bowed down to him as our savior, I probably would not sell him into slavery, but I thought about it for a second. Anyway, the central question of Joseph's story, and consequently its very faithful adaptation in The Ballad of Little Joe, is this. Why do bad things happen to good people? And the answer the narrative presents is very explicit. For every bad thing that happens to you now, God will manipulate your circumstances so that a good thing happens to you later.
Hey, Jude, what you did was wrong. And it hurt me very much. But what you intended for harm, God used for good.
And the story makes it pretty clear that the way you should actuate this moral in your life is to react aggressively positively at every dark turn that comes your way. Get sold into slavery? Be the absolute best slave in your master's house, to the point that he names you Employee of the Month, presumably with big air quotes around employee. The slave master's wife wants your hot Israelite dick so bad and gets so offended when you nobly reject her advances that she tries to get you falsely Me Too'd, thereby getting you thrown in jail? Well, you've been meaning to reform the carceral justice system recently, and what better position to do it in than from inside a cell? Let's fix up that furnace. And hey, maybe you'll make some career connections in prison so that when a famine is about to hit Egypt, you'll be perfectly positioned to interpret the Pharaoh's dream and become the most powerful man in Dodgeball City, thereby allowing you to reunite with your family and finally forgive them after all these years. Happy endings all around. And honestly, I'm over here like, holy fucking chess master, Batman. I've talked before about how I don't like the trope of a secret omniscient character secretly manipulating everything behind the scenes in order to make the plot happen. Turns out I like this trope even less when it's presented as praxis. In real life, you cannot trust that every bad thing that happens to you is going to lead to good things down the road. You can make some bad things into good things, but God isn't gonna do it for you. You gotta do it yourself. And the thing it requires more than faith Life is elbow grease. Hope is not the thing with feathers. Hope is the thing with a backache. Hope is covered in sweat and dirt and blood, spitting out its own teeth, groaning in pain, but nonetheless rising up from the ground for another shot at the task ahead of it. I don't think that Joseph is wrong for trying to make the best out of his bad situation or for keeping an upbeat attitude despite his adversity, but I do think that the story is wrong for coincidencing and good-lucking him into wild success and then attributing it to God when it happens. I think internalizing this episode's moral leads to a toxic worldview. In Me, Myself, and Bob, after Big Idea Studios goes kaput and is swept out from under him, Phil Vischer writes an entire chapter where he tries to figure out what went wrong. And because he believes in a literal God who made him special, loves him very much, and takes an active interest in shaping the trajectory of his life, Phil has to spend a not insignificant amount of word count figuring out why exactly God did this to him. Why did God give him this idea, this talent, this company, this ministry, this mainstream success, and then take it all away from him? And at the risk of spoilers, I'll just straight up tell you, Phil eventually arrives at the correct answer, but the route he takes to get there is as labyrinthine as it is bonkers. Because look, Phil got caught up in the capitalism game. He started doing the right thing for the wrong reasons and in the wrong ways. But Phil interprets this as God's way of, like, reminding him what's really important. When I'm over here like, Phil, you did that. In writing this book, you have reflected on your mistakes. You have decided what lessons to draw from your failure. And isn't that just so much more empowering? And hey, what if you decide later that you're wrong? That there is more than one truth to be divined from the great and beautiful, ever-expanding text that is your life. And Phil is kind of a best-case scenario here. There are larger implications to the idea that not only is there just one truth, but it's a divine truth, an ineffable truth, and God knows what it is, but we will never know, and that's fine, actually. We just have to trust God to figure it out, and if a bad thing happens, it's probably good that that happened. It's probably for the best. It's all part of God's ineffable plan. The power structures that are currently in place probably know what they were doing, and hey, if people died because of the bad thing, they probably deserved it. I resent the idea that I'm supposed to find meaning in every shitty thing that happens to me. I reserve the right to find meaning in some of them, if I feel like it, but most of the time, I find great comfort in the fact that my suffering has no intrinsic meaning. That the universe is not a cruel place, just an indifferent one. That if there's going to be any meaning in my life, it's up to me and the people I love to create it together. And finally, I just want to say something to Pete. Hi, Pete. I'm sorry you didn't get put in the same classroom as your friends. That straight up sucks. I don't know whose job it is in the school district to decide which kid goes in which class, but I get a hunch that if you appealed to them directly, they probably wouldn't be very sympathetic. They'd probably tell you to suck it up and tough it out, although much like this episode of VeggieTales, they'd probably try to dress up that sentiment in some fluffy, inspirational-sounding language. And you know what, Pete? Those people aren't like 100% wrong. They're jerks, but like all good villain advice, there's a grain of truth somewhere in there. You don't have the power to get yourself back in the class with your friends in it. Sadly, the only thing you do have power over is how you're going to face this challenge. I think this school year is going to be tough for you, but the good news, Pete, is that I believe in you. I believe in your ability to either find or make something fun out of your bad situation. Maybe you can make a new friend in this class. Maybe you can find a new hobby or a new after-school activity that you like doing. Maybe you'll learn some cool stuff from this teacher that you wouldn't have learned otherwise. But also, maybe none of that'll happen. Maybe this year is just gonna be kinda shit. Sometimes adults spend so much of our energy telling kids that it's gonna be alright that we forget something important. Shit sucks right now, and it's okay to be sad about it. You don't want to wallow in the sadness forever, but sometimes you gotta wallow for a little bit. And when you're done, you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and you keep going. Anyway, briefly, Happy Kai-Ai Birthday does not slap. Dream of a Dozen Cactus kinda slaps, but again, mostly because of Kurt Heineke's instrumentation, which he clearly had a lot of fun with this episode. Oh Little Joe super fucking slaps, but I'm also just a sucker for Western-style 3-part harmonies. Any Riders in the Sky fans out there, you know what I'm talking about. I'm Blue is an extremely poor parody of both I'm Tired from Blazing Saddles and I'm So Blue from Madame Blueberry, and it does not slap. Belly Button slaps extremely hard and is an absolutely pitch-perfect Backstreet Boys / generic boy band send-up. And I'm sorry, can we just talk about these harmonies?
And no one can deny.
Ooh! Oh Little Joe Jail reprise, see above. The Mayor's Dream is just a reprise of the Cactus Dream song, but it slaps more because Mr. Nezer's deep sonorous bass is always welcome. And of course, the What Have We Learned song, open parentheses, Western version, close parentheses, absolutely slaps.
Next time on Does VeggieTales Hold Up? One small hop for asparagus, one giant leap to the silver screen. Can this cauliflower sweet and sour half-an-hour franchise sustain itself for thrice its usual runtime? Can our favorite prophet get the stick out of his ass long enough to internalize the film's lesson? And perhaps most importantly, how racist can one caterpillar get? Stay tuned for a deep dive into Big Idea's first full-length talking picture, Excelsior!
I suppose I'll just never learn how to love. Oh, I'm never gonna learn how to love because I'll never accept Jesus Christ within me heart. I'm Jewish, I can't do it. I can't accept Jesus Christ within me heart. I can't do it, I've tried. My nagging Jewish mother would be furious with me. I'm just a sad little orphan on the streets of Yorkshire. This is by far the most specific character I have ever come up with. A tiny little Jewish orphan boy in Yorkshire. From Yorkshire. He's Jewish, he's from Yorkshire, he's an orphan, he's sad. He's a little lot of a twist. He's a little lot of a twist boy, but he's from Yorkshire, not London. And he's Jewish. You've got to pick a pocket or two, boys. Am I contributing to Jewish stereotypes by saying that? I don't even know anymore.